President, members of the board, good evening. Tonight I'm going to sort of introduce the players and then let them present. Visiting tonight here, Mr. Marty Jones from Guston Rosenfeld, and we invited Jennifer McLennan as well. She may or may not come in. We knew that she would be late. We also have our new manager of procurement, Mr. Bill Brennan. Just for a little background, because he is so new, Bill's been in materials and contract management for 33 years, including 15 years in the private sector with Garrett, Allied Signal, and Honeywell Aerospace, and 15 years in public procurement with Coconino Community College, Director of Materials and Contract Management with Flagstaff Unified School District, and also some time with Mojave Educational Services Cooperative. So that's a new perspective that we've not had in the past. He obtained his Certified Purchasing Manager's certificate in 2006 and recently acquired the Arizona Certified School Business Specialist certification and studied communications at Glendale Community College, New Mexico State University, and business at Arizona State University. So with that, Mr. Bill Brennan.
Thank you.
Yes.
President Jewett, members of the board, and Superintendent Boyle. Thank you very much, first off, for allowing me to serve the students and faculty and the staff here at Creighton School District. I'm very confident that I will be able to deliver a very quality program for procurement that will meet all of the guidelines and compliances with the state procurement code. So thank you very much for that. Okay, solar. I understand that there was a committee that was established a few years ago to discuss and look at the possibility and feasibility of doing solar here at the district. Also understand that that was sort of put on the back burner, a little bit of reduced priority. But recently, board member Arenas had asked that the board revisit this and maybe move forward with contracting, in this particular case, with Scottsdale Unified School District's contracts, in which case they had 5 companies under contract that provide solar power. At that point, I was asked to review and essentially calculate or figure out whether or not we can move forward using those contracts. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and I'll go through the presentation. We'll first discuss and review the actual contracts with Scottsdale Unified School District. We'll look at the Arizona Auditor General's alert that was issued in July of last year. We'll look at the steps for building a CESD solar program. Bless you. And then we'll look at the energy equipment upgrades and also the solar project timelines that we envisioned we can move forward with. And there are 2 separate timelines. God bless you. Must be contagious. And there are 2 different timelines that we can look at. If time is of the essence, or whether or not we can take a longer look, which would be more of a quality program. Actually, there were 2 proposals that were issued, requests for proposals from Scottsdale Unified. The first one was RFP 10135, that was in September and October of 2009. It did contain cooperative language, and there were 10 districts included as interested parties. Looking at that list, Creighton School District was not one of those districts. A couple years later, in 2011, RFP 11160 was issued. There was no cooperative language whatsoever contained in the original solicitation. However, They did issue shortly thereafter an addendum number 2, which added cooperative language, and it also listed 7 interested districts. After reviewing these contracts, I had further discussions with Mike Romanoff, who was the purchasing director at Scottsdale Unified School District. Actually, his title's a lot longer, and I'm going to get into that. But just to bring you up to date, though, I received a notification from Mike Romanoff later today, late this afternoon, that the superintendent at Scottsdale Unified had in fact canceled RFP 10135. And since RFP 11160 was specific to elevated ground units, there is no way that we could use either of those contracts at this point. In July of last year, the Auditor General issued an alert, which basically was a culmination of a lot of audits that they had reviewed relative to PPAs, or power provider agreements. And what they had determined was, out of the 21 districts that they reviewed with those PPAs, that they found an unusually high a level, if you will, of unexpected or savings that actually were not attained to the expectations. For instance, some of the issues that contributed to that was continued demand in transmission charges from the utility companies, meaning that they continue to charge at the current rates as opposed to either reducing rates, either at generated levels or demand levels. Also, it appeared as though that the number of districts had in fact oversized their particular solar units. And what had happened in that regard is that they exceeded their demand, and once they did that, they exceeded what they call net metering, which is 100% of their demand. And there are some cost implications with that, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And then the other thing that they found was the fact that many of the PPAs had contained escalation clauses that were as much as 2 to 5% per year for up to 20 years. Their preference, obviously, is that we try to avoid any kind of escalation clauses. And I say we as all districts in the state.
I have a question on that last slide.
Yes.
Let me go back to it. So the Auditor General issued this alert that districts in out of state were they more specific about it? Were there some that maybe didn't have exceeding power generated, maybe did have savings? Or I would think also that I know that some of the contracts, or sometimes when they're right in the contracts, they have, this is how much you're going to be paying per month for X amount of years. So I guess there's that little clause that says unless you use more, but then if they're building, if they have solar panels that exceed their needs, then why are they using more? You know, it's like, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. Especially, well, they're not being more general about like which districts or what percentage of districts, or it's just kind of a general alert, I guess.
Correct. Board member Sexton Reese, I hope I pronounced that correct. They do have data that is more exact and more definitive than what was in that alert, obviously. I can tell you that those contracts, and then that was part of their concern, is that the contracts were not written very well. And so the escalation clauses were included. There were no guarantees in many cases that were included. And for that reason, they threw out the alert to say, look, this has got to stop. It was a high number. That was 21 districts. I can tell you that's probably the total number of districts in the state that probably have introduced solar applications. I'm sure Marty could probably give me a better number than that. But it really boils down to making sure that the contract is written and written well. Absolutely. Did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, in the actual the alert itself, the Auditor General had made recommendations to employ a good solar contract, or the best practices for implementing solar contract systems. First thing is perform a cost and benefit analysis. Obviously, we need to determine exactly where we are, establish a baseline, and find out whether or not we have a need to improve the equipment, number one, find ways that we can cut back, and then also find the benefits of moving forward if we decide to do a solar application. And again, I say we, and I refer to we as school districts in general. The second thing is to perform energy upgrades. And the energy upgrades would actually be doing an assessment of the sites and the buildings and determining whether or not we can upgrade the HVAC systems, the lighting, possibly windows, insulation, and other things that would help cut down on energy costs. We need to learn from other districts' experiences. Obviously, they did the alert, which means that many of the districts did not do a very good job. Yet at the same time, there are some districts like Scottsdale that did do a very good job. So if we're looking for mentoring, I think we need to look for those good districts, and Scottsdale is definitely one of those. We need to avoid purchasing oversized solar power systems, and the reason for that is once you get into a net metering and you start to exceed that net metering, you're actually producing more energy than you really need. It's going back to the grid, and the cost savings that you get from the utilities does not come anywhere close to what it costs you in operational costs of producing that energy. Need to clarify key provisions of the electrical utilities policies. One of the things that we need to understand as we move forward is if we start to reduce demand on the utilities, what are their policies related to that? In other words, if we reduce our demand or we reduce our need for them, then what is the impact? What are they going to impose on this? And then understanding what charges the utility companies themselves are going to continue to impose for generation and demand and transmission. Continuing on with the best practices, need to avoid cost escalators, which I had mentioned earlier, which could be 2 to 5%, and generally anywhere between 1 to 20 years. Need to ensure that we're meeting the statutory requirements under ARS 15213. And consider operational issues when entering into long-term contracts. For example, if we enter into a long-term agreement and we do an installation on a site, and say 10 years down the road, the student population reduces to the point where we need to close a school, and it happens to be that school with that particular solar unit on it, the term of that contract is still ongoing. So we may only be halfway through that particular lease term and still obligated to pay. So those are the types of things you have to look at. Again, the other things that you have to look at is equipment is getting better and better all the time. And if we were to try to maximize and get as much as we can out of the solar systems right now, if we implemented a better HVAC system 10 years from now, it might put us very, very close to net metering. So we have to be very cautious in that regard. The steps that we need to do if we are to move forward, if the board so decides to do so, is to follow the Auditor General's guidelines, which would keep us on a roadmap or a path that would meet not only compliance with them, but it is a best practice. The first thing is to hire a commissioning agent to do an energy audit. We would issue the RFP, we would award that contract, they would begin services on that. We would implement an energy performance solutions thereafter based on that analysis. And that would include, again, anything that would be a viable upgrade, obviously something that would be within budget that we'd be able to afford. And, excuse me, I got a friend here. And, excuse me. And then we would contract with those energy savings companies, better known as ESCOs, that would actually do the installations. We would then follow up and do a post-audit to find out, again, from the baseline, where are we at now before getting into the next phase. That next phase would actually be again, selecting a solar provider and doing the installation, and then doing a final audit again by that commissioning agent. When we look at some of the timelines, I actually presented two, and I think you probably have the two timelines available in your board packages. Okay. They range anywhere on the energy upgrade side from 230 days to 275 days. And that includes doing the RFP, the energy audits, the upgrades, actually the solicitations, and then the upgrades, and then the final audit and calibrations. Now, the reason for the gap of about 45 days or so is one method we would do our own RFP. The next one would actually be, or the other option would be doing using one of the cooperative agreements that are available to us out there. They're under the solar system installation side of things. We're looking at about 410 to 440. We'd be looking at about 180 days total package using both the energy upgrades and doing the solar system installation. Would be approximately 410 to 455 days. Again, before closing and answering any further questions, I'd just like to reiterate that the Auditor General has set in place a very good path for us to follow if the board so desires to move forward on this. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, Bill, first I want to welcome you to the district. I'm glad that you're here.
Thank you.
I'm really glad to see that there's been progress on this issue. It looks like there's a lot of work and thoughtfulness went into the timeline and what was presented tonight. So I just want to commend you guys for doing that. One thing I emailed you about earlier was making sure that in our timeline that the APS timeline is also incorporated, so that we make sure that we can benefit from those APS incentives. Because without those incentives, it really doesn't make sense for our district to have a solar project, because that's where the savings is for our district. So just want to make sure that we're moving along on the same page as APS. And then we did submit an application to APS, and they did come out and look at one of our sites. So an update on whether they're going to accept our application or not, and when that's going to happen, I think would also be helpful, in addition to what you guys have been doing.
President Judith, Board Member Arenas, yes, I remember the email. And I was not aware of the APS application that went through, so
Okay.
as mentioned on my response to you, that Roy and I will work on that. We'll find out where that sits in the status. I can tell you that my past experience when I was at Mojave, we were doing contracts for solar. And one of the key factors that each and every one of the power providers that we interviewed basically had said is that without the incentives, it is very difficult to pencil in any kind of cost savings. So I completely agree with you.
I have a question. I am actually looking at my email because on August 9th I received an email saying that APS was trying to add, because of solar happening, I don't know if you've heard of this, but because of solar happening, they're trying to add, or they're asking the corporate commission if they can add fees to solar customers because they're losing business, as you were saying on one of your slides. What will they do in the future? So that's something I think we need to be aware of. Is APS going to do that? I heard SRP is not at this time, but APS is asking the corporate commission, so we need to keep an eye on that and see if they succeed. I know there's a lot of activists and solar people trying to reverse that or to get that not to happen. So we need to be aware of that too.
Did that apply to residential or all customers?
And I thought Marty mentioned that last time when we were at the work study, right, since you're here anyway, and you've hung out with us this long, maybe put you to work, right? I think he had mentioned that before, that's some of the concerns about what they're trying to do is offset the costs and particularly push it back onto the actual users of solar. So I don't know if Marty, can you answer the question?
Yeah,
Does it apply to everybody?
The proposal that APS has made to the Corporation Commission is that it would apply to everybody. They're particularly interested in residential. I think I mentioned to you at the study session that if you look at your APS bill right now, there's a $4 or $5 charge for solar users. They're wanting to increase that dramatically. And the argument that APS is making is that by using solar energy, the solar users are not paying their fair share for maintenance of the grid. And that's why they need this increase is to have everybody paying for their share of maintenance of the grid. I don't know if I said this to you before, but when you do a solar project, the energy that's generated by that solar panels get dumped into the grid. You're still taking your electricity off of the grid. You're not going to have a building out there that has a big, massive batteries stacked in the building, storing up this solar energy for you to use. It's just a trade-off that you're doing with the utility. They're getting credit for, we talked about the renewable energy credits. They get those renewable energy credits to show the Corporation Commission that they've in fact met the Arizona REST rules. And in exchange, you get a better rate. So the solar energy is getting used, but it's not a direct one-to-one kind of thing. When you flip the lights on, it's not necessarily, the electricity may come through your solar panels, but it doesn't necessarily. So what APS is saying is, you're using our grid just like everybody else is, but you're not paying for it because you're not paying us the electric rates that everybody else is.
I thought it just applied to residential, so Bill, would you mind just following up with APS to clarify whether the fee would apply to residential only or both?
I will.
Thank you.
And to understand, all the APS can tell you is what their proposal is. It's entirely up to the
That's
Corporation
good.
Commission what they approve.
That's such a fun body to work with.
Bill, I have just a timeline. Sorry, Bill, I have a timeline question. So welcome to the districts.
Thank you.
I appreciate your presentation because it was very well organized and very clear. So thank you. In terms of the two different options and the number of days you spoke about, obviously the lengthier timeline gives us a greater chance of creating the most effective, program that's advantageous to the district, which I appreciate that perspective. Just a question around whether or not, obviously, if we do the first RFP for the energy audit, is it not possible to simultaneously do the RFP for solar and then wait to award until after the results of the work that we do? And so that basically the proposal days and the RFP work, those 20 to 40 to 80 days that are on the solar side, could be happening simultaneously with the energy conservation piece. Is that how you kind of envision it working, or do you see them really happening one right after the other?
President Jewett, a board member last with her.
Good job.
Did I do it right?
Exactly right.
Thank you. One of the things that, let me answer your question. Yes, it's possible, but, Marty has mentioned a couple different options that we can do as well. But my background has been to make sure that we have all the numbers first, because we develop that into the RFP. Marty has maybe suggested we go ahead and do those simultaneously, possibly pre-qualify the third-party power providers. And then, once we get the actual audit results, then try to move forward and qualify the most, or one or two, whatever we need. So I think there are some options and some areas that we could see some simultaneous things happen. Yes. And if we do, we certainly will take advantage of it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Your questions? I think that this is wonderful that, first of all the work that has been done, and even if for some reason we don't come out of this with solar, to have done an energy audit, it sounds like either way we will be reducing our carbon footprint and reducing our energy costs. So I'm really happy about this. So thoughts? We need.
Motion.
Okay. I will, since you have been such a champion, Ms. Arenas, I will let you motion this.
I move the governing board approve to move forward in the solicitation process on solar energy program for the Creighton School District.
Is there a second?
I second.
It has been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it is approved. And we move on to future agenda items.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bill, Marty, Jennifer. So future agenda items. First of all, does anyone have anything to add?
Oh,
Go ahead, Jean.
no, I don't even know if I need to do this or anything, but I just want to point out that the open source software presentation will be happening on September 17th. So
Excellent.
I was able to schedule time for that.
Okay, and the district knows that.
Yes.
I guess I need a yellow card, or whatever color card that is, but I wanted to do our second part for the KI-16 presentation now that the schools are in session. We had talked about a while ago, and then maybe when we have KI-16 come and do their presentation again, inviting the art teachers from the schools, and maybe having it at the beginning so they don't have to do so long.
Okay. So what is the, so is the purpose kind of to, is it a different presentation than last time, or is it similar just to, but also having art teachers? I don't.
Well, I think we had talked about having it so we could get to know them, and then having, I mean, you could probably do a different presentation, but just a lot, because when we did it before, everyone was on break. So, so we can have the art teachers get to know KI-16 and think about how they might want to integrate that in there.
Yeah.
if I may add, in addition to that, we have been approached by Solicitation 60 and with a project that they're interested in moving forward on. So that would be, I would think that at that presentation, we would want the people who reached out to us to be there too. And it's the project that's the wall that's near the canal, a little north of Creighton School.
Can it be seen from McDowell, the wall?
No.
And it
You
can't
would
be.
see it north if you were coming south from Thomas around 30, whatever.
Can't go
Which,
south.
you know, where was that?
You can see it from the residential areas on the other side of the canal. That wall has been painted, I don't know what Roy is, but at least
Creighton School
100,
District.
at least 100 times.
I write.
It's the back of the transportation wall that's facing the canal
Mm-hmm.
because it gets hit with graffiti
I know which one, but
regularly. This would be a great opportunity to
And that's
see
what Coyote 60 approached
what
you with?
the effect
Yeah.
would be.
I know,
They
that's right.
approached us with it, and we thought it would be a good place to just as a dry run.
And when I was canvassing for a candidate for an issue, the people in that neighborhood had specifically talked about that as a problem area, so, yeah.
it's right near the bridge that goes over the little walk bridge. Yeah, I know exactly what it is, and I was thinking about it.
I believe we were approached by a neighborhood leader to the president of a neighborhood association about that specific one, so hopefully that was it. So, yeah,
You guys can't talk that much about it.
that is true.
Okay.
So, so we can add that to the agenda. I just wanted to make sure if that was something that was particularly for the art teachers, that maybe this wouldn't be a good forum to have them in the evening. You know, if this wasn't convenient for them, but it sounds like there is something for us to bring back before the board.
Yeah,
And we can't really discuss it a lot, but it sounds like it's something to have it as a presentation. And then,
I would like, so I apologize for my tardiness in drafting the governing board goal that I said that I would draft in terms of our participation, but I've emailed something to Hilda, and if it's possible to put it on the agenda for the first. It's one of our to be determined future items, I believe, in terms of the goal setting piece maybe, or maybe that's embedded in something else. I can't remember the list. But I'd love to, if we can, we've got the student achievement study session on the 3rd where we're going to start hearing from our campuses, but to also kind of break up perhaps a more lengthy presentation in the student achievement updates item so that we can just get those regularly scheduled, however that works for the agenda. And then I'd like to move as quickly as we can on a Move On When reading update in terms of our, K-3 reading initiatives and our plan and the response to, the documentation and sort of what we're doing, what our estimated numbers are for our students, since this year is the first year that we're going to have to begin retaining students in 3rd grade. So I'd rather we start having that conversation sooner rather than later, if that's possible.
we agree. Are there any others that we can schedule? The overview of the board's budget should be not horrendously difficult. That can be
It's so small.
exactly. It's basically our travel to NSBA or ASBA and anything else. So, but again, sorry, can't talk about that. The overview, okay. The district PLC, Richard Dufour, I see on there. Is that a particular person we are waiting on that person's schedule, or is that?
Rick DeFore is one of the experts as far as providing opportunities and professional development on professional learning communities. And I think the important thing is that we do present the work that's happening now in Creighton School District and take a look at professional learning communities, because that is the design of our reteach and enrich grade level professional development. That's where the work of looking at data and coming together to look at data and plan, et cetera.
So is that him that we're waiting on?
No.
No, okay.
No, it's his work.
It's just his work, right?
Oh,
So,
too much information.
yeah, so what I'm trying to get at is, are we waiting on when we can schedule these?
Well, and that along with differentiated teacher-led professional development, that should really go together, because that professional learning communities is all about professional development for teachers. So I think if we can combine those two, we can be efficient with our time.
Okay.
And I think, can I talk? I'm looking at my boss over there. I think it's a matter of looking at the time frame and making sure that those things that are relevant to forward motion in the district and have timelines like finance reports, et cetera, that we want to make sure, or anything that's current topic gets planned first, and then some of this other information that's critical, but and move on when reading, etc. So I think it's just taking the agenda items and listening to board information on that, and then scheduling them, and not having a meeting that lasts, beyond
Yes.
10 o'clock or so.
So I will work as president with the administration to get as many of these scheduled as possible. And it sounds like we have a couple of dates on a couple of these already now, so that's great. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.